She's got a point. She's an icon. She's a legend. And she is the moment. Now, come on now.
In competitive Pokemon, there are some types that are pretty much objectively better than others. For example, Steel is almost always better than Rock, Water is almost always better than Ice, and pretty much any type is better than Grass and Bug. But when it comes to moves, no matter the typing, they all have a chance to be really good competitively. So I wanted to go through and find the best move of all 18 types. But I have a very specific definition of what is a good move. For a move to be considered the best, basically it has to have good distribution and be relevant in most tiers. For example, Water Spout. It is a great move, but it's the signature move of Kyogre, which means that unless you're playing in the Uber tier, you don't really need to worry about it. It also means that a move can be great, but if it's stuck on Pokemon that mainly suck, so it's not getting used that much, it's not going to be on this list. Essentially, a better title would actually be what move of every type has been the most significant and popular historically throughout competitive singles. But that's not, it's kind of wordy, so that's not the title. As always, feel free to disagree, although I would appreciate it if you didn't. So I want to get the obvious one out of the way, which is the Rock type. The Rock type is in a similar situation to the Ice type in the sense that defensively, it is absolutely horrible, but offensively, it's actually pretty solid. However, the best Rock type move isn't an attacking move, it's Stealth Rock, which is the only move that I even considered for this type, unlike the other types where there are also other contenders. Stealth Rock has to be top 10 most important moves in all of competitive singles. It was first introduced in Gen 4, single-handedly destroying the dreams of all Charizard fanboys. There really are not that many moves that were able to nerf to such degree so many Pokemon that otherwise would have been perfectly or more viable. It's a move that is consistently good against pretty much any type of team because passive damage will catch up to anybody, and its distribution is good to an honestly evil degree. Sometimes it feels like everybody and their moms has this move, which means that you're never going to escape it. And even though in Gen 8 heavy duty boots were introduced, that didn't stop Rocks since knockoff exists. It is a move that by itself was an indicator of how good certain type combos would be. Without this move, the entire metagame would look much different. Even across this list, when we talk about other moves, very few of them were as impactful as Stealth Rocks. It's obviously one of the main reasons to use heavy duty boots, but also use Defog and Rapid Spin. In my opinion, it's the most powerful hazard of all time. This move is actually the reason I wanted to make this video, so it earned this spot. Number 2, Electro type. I narrowed it down to 2 moves, that being Thunderbolt and Volt Switch. Thunderbolt is great because it strikes a good balance. It has perfect accuracy, good power, and generally pretty accessible. Something that other moves don't have, but this category definitely goes to Volt Switch. Pivoting moves in Pokemon are some of the most valuable moves in the game, because managing to little by little rack up residual damage can ultimately be game winning, but the concept of pivoting moves just works so well in a game where switching and predictions are vital. It literally goes hand in hand. It's a crucial move in the arsenal of Pokemon like Rotom Wash, Iron Tread, Zapdos, and more, so I think this one isn't too controversial. Also, please subscribe to my channel or else Game Freak will give Toxic back to Blissey in Gen 10, and nobody wants that. The move that I considered were Aqua Jet, Flip Turn, Scald, Hydro Pump, and Liquidation. So starting off, Aqua Jet, which is 40 base power move, but it has priority. Priority moves are generally considered to be top tier because you get to negate your potential lower speed stat. It's great to off opponents if they have lower health, so it was definitely a contender. Next is Flip Turn. Flip Turn is great again because pivoting moves, what I just said. As soon as Mega Swampert got it, people were using it on him. Pretty much everything that I said for Volt Switch is valid here. Next was Hydro Pump. Hydro Pump has great distribution, 110 base power, and I just wish that it hit more often. Liquidation. Liquidation is one of the few good physical water type attacks with decent power and a good secondary effect, with the chance of lowering the Pokemon's defenses, which is great if you're straight up spamming it. But the winner of this is Scald. It was always going to be Scald. Scald is a move that sends shivers through physical attacker's spine, which is a testament to its greatness. Scald was a move introduced in Gen 5. Scald is 80 base power with a 30% chance of burning with 24 power points. And it is so good. Scald, particularly pre-Gen 9, has pretty good distribution. It was one of the main reasons Pokemon like the almighty Toxapex were so good. It has solid power, but it was really its ability to spam it because of the amount of power points that it has and its potential to neuter physical attackers really set it apart from other water-type Pokemon. Moves like Liquidation also have a secondary effect, but you can just switch out to get rid of that defense drop. Also, 30% chance to burn is great when historically the Pokemon who have been the best users of this move are Pokemon that can stay in and take many hits, like Toxapex, so that you can fish for that burn. There's a reason that people say Scald burns as often as Focus Blast misses. I don't know if Toxapex will get Scald next gen, but if she does, then it's kind of over. So it won this category. Next is Ice. Ice is definitely a type. There is kind of a good lack of viable Ice-type Pokemon. It isn't a very good defensive type, but offensively it's pretty great. Over recent gens, there have been good Ice-type moves that are more utility-oriented that have been added, but the move that I'm going to propose for the winner is Ice Beam, which is good because it has 90 base power, perfect accuracy, and great distribution. I know that you might be thinking, what about Aurora Veil? I did consider that. It set up both Light Screen and Reflect in one turn, but most notably known to be used by Alolan and Ninetales. But very few Pokemon have it, and only 2 of the Pokemon that do have it don't suck. Overall, Ice Beam won, and I know what about Chilly Reception. Here's the thing, I thought the same, but Chilly Reception was only introduced in this gen, and again, only 1 Pokemon has it, so it doesn't fit the rules that I said. Let's take a look at the Pokemon who have almost always ran Ice Beam in the past, just to prove my point. We can talk about Latias, Iron Bundle, Kyogre, Greninja, Deoxys Attack. It's overall super reliable, and when we look at past gens, we just see how good this move is. I mean, for offensive moves, it's a bit harder to verbalize how good they are, but for the first 5 generations, it was really important to pack a good Ice-type move because Dragon types were just so dominant. It was an absolute must, and this was a great move to have. Next is the Normal type. This is the hardest type to choose from since there are a total of 209 Normal type moves, the most of any type. The move that I narrowed it down to were Recover, Protect, Extreme Speed, Swords Dance, and Rapid Spin. Extreme Speed is a great move since Priority are usually on the weaker side to balance out the fact that Priority as a concept is just kind of broken. This move can be especially deadly though when we're talking about Terra Normal Extreme Speed Arceus, the most iconic user of it, that and Belly Drum Linoon. But it's not given to that many Pokemon, and many of the few that do have it have a terrible attack stat. But if we're being honest, that's probably for the best. Protect is another amazing move. I mean, you become immune to almost all moves. That's incredible. But the thing is, it is much more important in VGC compared to singles. It's very important here, but ask any VGC user and they will tell you how important it is. If I was talking about another competitive format, then it probably would have won this category. Next is Swords Dance. Swords Dance is just one of the best boosting moves by far. It has good distribution, and I don't really have anything negative to say about it. It's just great. Next is Rapid Spin. Rapid Spin is great not only because it clears hazards, but it also raises speed. Unfortunately, the majority of the Pokemon who have it kind of suck. No offense. Not all of them do, and I did strongly consider giving this category to Rapid Spin, but ultimately, Recover won. Recovery moves in general are one of the most important aspects in competitive singles, and Recovery is the most common viable one. It's an infuriating move, but god, it's a good move. I mean, we all love facing off against the Toxapex who spams Recover, right? And while recovery moves got nerfed in Gen 9, they're still very common. At one point, they even had 32 power points in Gen 3. Can you imagine if that was still the case? So, even though Rapid Spin was a very strong contender along with the other moves, I think that Recover earned this spot because it's just that notable. Next is the Dark type. Over the years, the Dark type has really aged like fine wine. From, great Dark type Pokemon being added, but also great Dark type moves being added. I've narrowed it down to Pursuit, Knockoff, Taunt, and Sucker Punch. Pursuit was great, but also not a thing anymore because it was very messy and overpowered. So it can't win this category by default, but I did want to mention it. Next is Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch has 70 base power and 100% accuracy if you predict correctly. It's probably my favorite personal priority move. It rewards smart predictions in plays, and I also cannot tell you how many times I've lost a match to a Sucker Punch from a King Gambit. Next is Taunt. Stopping your opponent from using non-attacking moves is just a dream. It's so important to have, especially when dealing with stall teams, when it can straight up neuter them. Plus, just seeing how opponents react to being taunted can tell you a lot about their team structure. The game would be completely different without this move. So that's why it's a tie between this and Knockoff. The benefits of Knockoff have always been great, but ever since heavy duty boots were introduced in Gen 8, Knockoff became infinitely more valuable. Now that it seems like 80% of Pokemon have heavy duty boots, having Knockoff so that you can actually benefit from the chip damage of hazards is pretty much a must on any team. It's especially beneficial when you're going up against stall teams, since knocking off boots and forcing them to switch in and out of hazards is a good way to wear them out. It's great for any team obviously, but especially for bulkier teams, when it seems like they live forever. So I very much feel that Knockoff deserves this spot along with Taunt. Next up is Fire. Fire is a great offensive typing, and there was kind of little competition when deciding what fire type move was the best. In my mind, immediately went to Will-o-wisp. I understand that moves like Flamethrower and Fire Blast are great, and maybe are the first to come to mind, but Will-o-wisp feels like it earned this one. Many Fire-type moves have a chance to burn, but Will-o-wisp is the only move where this is its sole purpose. It is guaranteed to burn your opponent if you actually manage to land the stupid move. Many, and I mean many Pokemon have access to it, and being able to neutralize a physical offensive Pokemon is fantastic. It's very valuable since after a Pokemon's attack stat is reduced by 50%, even if you try to salvage your attack stat via boosting move, you're honestly already cooked. If a Pokemon is poisoned, it can still cause major damage with its limited time, but when it is burned, it's pretty much over. Good luck landing it though. Next is the bug type. The bug type has to be top 3 worst types of all time. Maybe top 2, maybe top 1 actually, but it does have some insane moves. I've narrowed it down to U-turn and Sticky Web, and although it was very close, I decided on U-turn. What I said about Volt Switch is valid for U-turn, so I won't repeat that. What I will focus on is why exactly I chose it over Sticky Web. Sticky Web reduces a Pokemon's speed by 1 stage. It's an amazing move. Just having Sticky Web makes a Pokemon almost instantly viable. All you need to do is tank 1 hit, which you can do via Focus Sash. It's one of the reasons that Ribombee has huge usage in Ubers over other legendary Pokemon. The reason I'm not choosing it as number 1 is mainly because of that Ubers comment that I made. Don't get me wrong, Sticky Web is a great move in pretty much any tier, but you will see Sticky Web used a lot more in Ubers, mainly because many Pokemon in the Uber tier are forced to have items like Giratina, almost all forms of Arceus except normal, Zacian, and Zamazenta, even though no one uses Zamazenta, but you get the point. Historically, Sticky Web has always been a good strategy. It's never been non-relevant, but not exactly S tier. You know what has always been S tier? U-turn. No matter what gen ever since its introduction, U-turn has always been a must. Next is Grass. It's also not a very good type, but it does have a good move. The moves that I chose were Leech and Trailblaze. Trailblaze is a new move added in Generation 9. It has 50 base power, but it also raises your speed by 1 stage, and even though it was just added, it has pretty good distribution. And although it is on the weaker side, that speed boost really is worth it, since in competitive singles, speed is king. It's definitely the best grass type attacking move in my opinion, and although there isn't much competition because the grass type is not particularly a great offensive typing, it is something. But Leech Seed in my opinion wins this category. Leech Seed takes 1/8 of the HP of our opponent, and it gives it back to the user. It's a great way to slowly suck the life out of your opponent, but also to force your opponent to switch out. It's been around since Gen 1, and it's been relevant every single generation. And it's become better and better since Gen 1, since more and more good grass types have been introduced, like Ferrothorn, Rillaboom, and even Mega Venus. It's an amazingly infuriating move, and I think that it deserves to win this category. Next is Dragon. I have the unpopular opinion that the Dragon type actually doesn't have that many great moves or even good moves. Like, there are other types on here where I might not have talked about that many moves, but that's not because they don't have good moves, it's just because there's a few that stood out more than others. But for Dragon, I really do think it's the other way around, where there are a few that are good or great, but the others kinda suck. But that's besides the point. The moves that I chose were Draco Meteor, Dragon Dance, and Scale Shot. Draco Meteor is the go-to special Dragon type move. It was nerfed in Gen 6 after it went from 140 base power to 130 base power, but it's still huge. And for a long time, especially when playing Ubers, you had to have a Pokemon that could tank Draco Meteors. In Gen 4, that was one of Dialga's many rules. Draco Meteor was just that girl, honestly. And although the Dragon type is not the same offensive powerhouse that it used to be, it still is good, and it's the best specially offensive Dragon type move. Next is Scale Shot. Scale Shot is the bane of my existence, and it was introduced in Gen 9. It's a move that can hit 2 to 5 times with a base power of 25, and a chance to raise your speed. This move is best paired with loaded dice in order to maximize damage, and it's best known for being used on Excalibur and Koraidon. And I think that it has overtaken and become a better physical Dragon type move than Outrage, which wasn't ever that good in the first place, but it was kind of a go-to move. Dragon Dance wins this category by a landslide. Dragon Dance is probably one of the best boosting moves, alongside Quiver Dance and Shift Gear, except that Dragon Dance is actually given to already good Pokemon, like Dragonite, Rayquaza, Zygarde, Dragapult, Tyranitar, etc. But the thing is that most, not all, but most Pokemon who have Quiver Dance and Shift Gear kind of suck with a few exceptions. Like Volcarona has Quiver Dance, yes, but most of the others who do suck. Dragon Dance is amazing because simply put, the concept of boosting your attack and speed at the same time is great. Why wouldn't you want that? Particularly the speed part, which again, when talking about competitive Pokemon, speed is arguably the most important stat. So next is Poison. Probably the most annoying type. The Poison type is mainly known for one thing, which is poisoning your opponents. So the move that I chose was Toxic. It wasn't really a competition. Toxic is probably the most common status condition for a reason, because once you have it, unless you have a Pokemon with Aromatherapy or Heal Bell, you're kind of stuck with it. Unlike Freeze or Sleep, where you can eventually get rid of it, you can't get rid of this one. It puts a timer on your Pokemon and it gets gradually worse, and unlike Sleep, there is no claws. And yes, in Gen 9, the amount of Pokemon with Toxic got nerfed, but pre-Gen 9, there was no lack of Pokemon with this move. And there were 2 Pokemon who were notoriously known for using Toxic, and they literally never died. So yeah, it's a no context. Next is Fairy. Fairy is kind of an interesting type in my opinion, because the Fairy typing itself is a lot better than Fairy type moves. There were really only 2 moves in the running, which are Play Rough and Moonblast, because they are really the only viable attacks, and they have okay distribution. Play Rough is really the only viable physical Fairy type move at 90 base power and accuracy, so if you need a physical Fairy type move for your Pokemon and you don't have access to Play Rough, then there's a good chance that you're just out of luck. But yes, it's decent. However, in my eyes, Moonblast is clearly the best move. Play Rough is the best special Fairy type move. It has 95 base accuracy and 100 attack, with 30% chance to lower your special attack. I mean, Xerneas and Iron Valiant as well as Clefable use it, pretty much anyone who's a special attacker. The reason I chose it was 1, it has 100% accuracy, which maybe 90% compared to 100 doesn't really seem like that big of a deal, but you have no idea how many times I've missed a Play Rough. And also, Fairy type Pokemon usually lean a bit more towards the special attacker side of the spectrum. I know that not only Fairy type Pokemon are going to use it, but they are the most likely to get it. So there are more viable Moonblast users than Play Rough users. Next is Psychic type. There are a lot of Psychic type moves. This category ended up being a tie between Light Screen and Reflect. We know what they do, they reduce the damage of physical and special type moves by 50%. Basing off against the Screen Abuser is one of the most infuriating things. While there are moves that can bypass it, it's not exactly like there's an abundance of them. You can take those moves to set up and etc., do whatever you need to do, but unless you have a move like Defog, you just have to wait out those turns. And obviously, the reason that both are tied is because they're almost exactly identical, and both physical and special attackers are really menacing. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other, so I feel like it's fair. Next is Ghost. I narrowed it down to Shadow Sneak and Poltergeist. Poltergeist is base 110 with 95% accuracy. It does fail though if the user does not have an items, so you better hope that you didn't use knockoff, but otherwise it's an amazing move for Pokemon like Giratina, Zoroark, Cerulege, and Sinistra. That being said, I'm choosing Shadow Sneak. Shadow Sneak is a 40 base power move with priority, and that's why I'm choosing it. It has priority. I don't think I need to reiterate why priority is great. I mean, getting a chance to always hit first no matter your speed stat is fantastic, and while 40 base power isn't super impressive, you're usually going to use this move to finish opponents who have low health. It's not going to be the main way to deal damage, so regarding the role that Shadow Sneak fills, there's very little moves that rival it. So now Steel. Steel is kind of like Fairy in the sense that it has great characteristics as a type, but it isn't exactly known for fantastic moves. So the moves that I chose were Flash Cannon, Iron Head, or Bullet Punch. Now, I was like 90% sure I was going to choose Bullet Punch, pretty much for the same reasons I chose Shadow Sneak, but then I realized that there are very few good Bullet Punch users. I mean, there's like Mega Scizor, Base Form Scizor, Mega Metachamp, Metagross, and the other Pokemon are not very impressive. So between Iron Head and Flash Cannon, which is the best? They both have the same base power with the same accuracy. They do have different effects though, with Iron Head having 30% chance of flinching and Flash Cannon having a 10% chance of lowering a Pokemon's defense. Ultimately, I chose Iron Head. Part of the reason is because I deem that 30% chance of flinching more worthwhile than that 10% chance defense drop, but also when we compare the Pokemon who have access to Flash Cannon versus the Pokemon who have access to Iron Head, and by that I mean that the Pokemon are actually good, outnumber the Pokemon with access to Flash Cannon that are actually good. So Iron Head wins, but it was pretty close. Next is Ground. Ground is possibly the best type, just straight up, and it has multiple amazing moves, but one stands out among all of them, and that's Spikes. This section is going to be very short, because I don't think you need convincing. Although I would say that Stealth Rock is the best hazard move, Spikes is a very close second. You can add up to 3 layers of it, and although a lot of people do argue that just 1 layer is enough because you don't get that much more damage from the 2nd and 3rd layer, it's a pretty indispensable move and an important part of the set of Clodsire, Gliscor, Garchomp, Skarmory, Ferrothorn, Thinglu, etc. You probably already knew that it was going to win this entry. Next is Fighting. The Fighting type has some great attacking moves. I mean, it's kind of in the name, so I sure hope so. Ultimately, it was between Close Combat, that is 120 base power with 100% accuracy with the drawback of lowering your defenses, and Mach Punch with 40 base power with 100% accuracy. And Priority. but the wind kind of went automatically to close combat when I realized that the Pokemon that have access to Mach Punch kind of suck. Meanwhile, close combat is a move that a lot of really great Pokemon have. Pokemon like Marshadow, Urshifu, Great Tusk, etc. use it. It's a perfect match for them. It's a no context. And although I wouldn't say the drawbacks of lowering your defenses are completely negligible, I would say that the payoff is enough. I mean, 120 base power off a decent attack stat is a lot. Next is Flying, where I narrowed it down to Defog, Tailwind, and Roost. Tailwind raises the speed of the Pokemon's allies. And meanwhile, on paper that's amazing, it kinda sucks in practice. Because it only works for 4 turns, and realistically, you're using one of those to switch out, so really it's just 3 turns. Soon you just realize that it's kinda useless. It's a lot like Trick Room in that regard. So you might be wondering why I mentioned it anyways if I think that it sucks. And that's because I kinda figured that people would bring it up, so that's why I'm not choosing it. So next is Roost and Defog. They were both great moves. Roost heals the user by 50%, similar to Recover, but if we're going to be honest, it has to be Defog. I've spent so much time talking about hazards and how important they are, it's only logical that a hazard removal move is on here. And Defog is the most common one since more Pokemon have Defog than have access to Rapid Spin. And yes, Defog does eliminate hazards on both fields. Yeah, sure, it's not great that hazards you set up disappear as well, but if you're a good player, you can mitigate that. So Defog wins this round. And I think that concludes everything. Just to reiterate, these are the best moves of every single type, according to me. What are you and I going to do with that information? I do not know. Maybe I should get a new hobby. But congrats if you made it to the very end. Thank you. I know the conditions that I laid out for what I considered the best move were very specific, but if I took the title literally of what is the best move of each type, if we're being honest, so many of these entries, maybe almost or all of them, would have just been Z moves, which I mean I think would just be kind of a boring video, so I had to set certain requirements for it. However, I do think that a lot of these entries are a bit, like, you can contest them. I don't think it's 100% accurate for every single one, but these are the conclusions that I came to. So thank you for watching.